He's watching.
He's watching football next door.
He's watching.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President, and I rise to make a contribution on the Kosciuszko Wild Horse Heritage Bill 2018. Let me say from the outset that Labor opposes this bill, but not because we disagree with the object of this bill, which is to recognise the heritage value of sustainable wild horse populations within parts of Kosciuszko National Park and to protect that heritage. But in its implementation, that this bill will fundamentally undermine the operation of the National Parks and Wildlife Act 1974. Mr Deputy President, there have been some big promises made in the second reading speech by the Deputy Premier in the lower house. There were big promises made that this would end aerial culling, that this would bring a more humane approach, that it was a lengthy contribution that made a great deal of promises about what this bill would do. Let's be clear about what the 9 pages of this bill actually does. It states the object, it establishes an advisory council, and it then says that this Act will override the National Parks Act. That's it, Mr Deputy President. There's no mention of aerial culling. There's no mention of a more humane approach. There's no mention, there's a mention of some regulations that may accompany this, but the bill that we are debating tonight does not deal with many of the substantive issues that have actually been discussed in this second reading debate tonight. That this bill is a classic example of the Deputy Premier. That this bill is a classic example of a Deputy Premier who continues to overpromise and fail to deliver. But Mr President, we should not even be debating this bill today. And I wish to foreshadow my support for the amendment moved by the Leader of the Opposition in this place. There are many clouds hanging over this bill. It has been widely reported that the Deputy Premier did not declare an interest prior to the Cabinet discussion of this legislation, despite receiving a $10,000 donation from the main proponent of this bill. Under the Ministerial Code of Conduct that was introduced in 2014, ministers...
Order. I think one is starting to stray into precisely the same territory that other members have. I encourage the member to consider before breaching the provisions of Standing Order 91.3 to consider her words.
I take the comments of the Deputy
and
President.
It's only a comment at this stage.
I take those comments and I will briefly make my point, which is in support of the amendment moved by the Leader of the Opposition and the many concerns that have been raised and ventilated in the public discussion around this bill. The issue of political donations was discussed in this House at length last week, and we moved deeply significant legislation that will allow real-time reporting of political donations. This bill, the discussion of this bill has been undermined because that disclosure has not been made. Indeed, the individual who made that significant financial contribution has subsequently bragged on Facebook that he commissioned to draft the bill, and perhaps he did. But there is no doubt, Mr Deputy President, there should be a full and thorough investigation of these issues before we consider it. Mr President, we are discussing the bill and I will outline why we oppose this bill. We acknowledge, New South Wales Labor acknowledges the cultural and tourism value of wild horses, and we supported a motion in the Legislative Assembly, the other place, last sitting week, recognising this cultural and tourism value. But let's be clear, this is not a bill that will protect the swelling numbers of visitors to the Kosciuszko National Park. It will not protect the Aboriginal cultural heritage of the park, nor will it protect the unique environment that the visitors come to see or the endangered animals that live within it. Some of my colleagues have spoken at length about the long history of the Kosciuszko National Park, and indeed it was declared by the great Labor Premier Bill McKell in 1944. And they extensively canvassed the incredibly meticulous approach that he took to declaring the national park. But I think in discussing this bill tonight, it is important that we reflect upon what that national park has brought to this particular region. This is the most visited national park in New South Wales outside the Greater Sydney region. Visitation in the last 2 years, from 2014 to 2016, has grown by 52%. This is a tourism mecca. I acknowledge that interjection. It is a tourism industry that is establishing itself as a year-round reality, and it's no longer existing from snow season to snow season. The explosion of visitors is actually happening as we see mountain bike riders and other hikers actually seeing the beauty of the national park and everything that it has to offer all year round. But Mr. Deputy President, back then in 1944, it was opposed by the forerunner to the National Party, the Country Party then, and this bill seeks to undermine the national park that brings so much to this region, that is so valuable to this region. Indeed, what should we expect when they've cut $121 million from the National Parks and Wildlife Service just over the last 2 years? Mr. Deputy President, I think it's important to note that on this particular issue, we are not the ideologues. New South Wales Labor are not the ideologues on this issue. We understand that there is a delicate balancing act that is required. We recognise the cultural role of the Brumbies. We recognise that there are a number of endangered species who have continued to exist in this park for much, much longer, for tens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. But we acknowledge that all of these species should be balanced together, that this is not the situation where one species should take supremacy. And that is why we are opposing this bill. Our opposition to this bill is mimicked and is reflected in the broader community and in the Monero region. There is a broad coalition that is opposed, from tourism operators to farmers to academics to environmentalists. And Mr. Deputy President, this is not a bill that's based in science. This is not a bill that's based in community consultation. Indeed, other speakers have reflected upon the 2016 draft Wild Horse Plan, and while this is potentially a starting point, at least there has been some community consultation rather than this, as I say again, 9-page bill that merely establishes an advisory committee with 2 other clauses actually bringing it into effect. Mr. Deputy President, it is indeed New South Wales Labor, and I pay tribute to the Shadow Environment Minister for her work in developing, in conjunction with our Country Labor candidate, Bryce Wilson, a 6-point plan to save Kosciuszko National Park and manage the wild horse population. Let me say this, Mr. Deputy President, there is more meat in this plan than there is in this entire bill that we are debating tonight. Labor's plan will explicitly outlaw aerial culling, which is not done in this bill. We will ensure that the plan of management of Kosciuszko National Park is the primary management document to guide the operation of this delicate and precious alpine environment. We will restore resources to the National Parks and Wildlife Service that have been cut by this government to protect the park's pristine environment and threatened species. We will minimise the impact of pest species, plants and animals, through adequately funded and effective control programs. We will conduct a scientific assessment and count of the horse population in consultation with key stakeholders. And this is a crucial point. This is a crucial point that much of the debate hinges on locally, is what is the actual count of the horse population? And that will be done under our plan. We will ensure wild horses are acknowledged for their cultural value by retaining a smaller population in the park where degradation is less critical, and manage the population guided by the extensive work that was produced in the draft Wild Horse Management Plan. And we will repair the mountain catchments. Now, Mr Deputy President, the plan that I have just briefly outlined is far more substantive than the bill that we are debating tonight. As I said, this is not a bill based in science. This is not a bill based in community consultation. This is a bill provided by a political donor to a desperate Deputy Premier.
Point of order.
This bill...
Point of order. Not much honour. Standing Order 91.3, I think that really has crossed the line.
Reflecting on another member of the other house.
The member can proceed, but
Moderate.
I'll give a closer.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. This bill doesn't provide the nuanced and sophisticated approach required for balancing the cultural heritage and significance of the Brumbies against the animals and plants who have existed in this country for thousands upon thousands of years. The member for Monero has had 8 long years to address this complex problem in a considered way. Instead, we get a 9-page, blunt instrument rushed through the Parliament in a desperate attempt to save his seat, a mere 10 months before an election. But I tell you what, Mr Deputy President, the people of Monero are onto him. They've seen him do this dance before. He says one thing locally and then comes to Macquarie Street and does the opposite. I oppose the bill.
Mr Deputy President.